So today we're looking at a period in U.S. history that is literally called the era of good feelings, which, I mean, sounds peaceful, right?
Yeah, it really does. But it is incredible how a name can just completely obscure reality.
Right, because underneath that label was this massive political pressure cooker, one that gave us, explosive market crashes, the birth of modern ruthless smear campaigns, and a constitutional crisis that almost tore the whole country apart.
Exactly. When you dig into the historical records from our source today, a learning module called Antebellum America, 1815-1840,
Uh-huh.
you realize you are not looking at an era of national harmony at all.
Not even a little bit.
No, you're looking at a house built directly on top of a massive active fault line. The paint might look gleaming on the outside, but the tension underneath is just waiting to snap.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly understand the messy, loud, two-party system we all live with today, we have to look at the structural cracks from this exact period.
We really do.
And if you're a listener who hates information overload, you are going to love how this module connects all the dots. Our mission here is to see how early economic schemes led to massive public resentment, which then birthed the modern political campaign and ultimately put just unprecedented power into the hands of a single executive.
Right, and to understand that tension, we have to start with the illusion of unity. So the year is 1815.
Okay.
The War of 1812 is over. The Federalist Party, which was the party of Alexander Hamilton and John Adams, has essentially collapsed.
Just gone.
Yeah, completely faded out. That leaves the United States with only one functioning national political party, the Democratic Republicans.
I mean, just one party running everything. That almost sounds like a fantasy for a politician today.
Oh, absolutely. And James Monroe certainly benefited from it. He takes the presidency in 1817, eventually wins re-election almost unanimously.
Wow.
He actually cultivates this whole image of being totally above partisan bickering. He takes tours around the country wearing his old Revolutionary War uniform, projecting this aura of post-war confidence.
And there was this massive economic blueprint fueling that confidence too, right? Henry Clay, the Speaker of the House, champions this really ambitious plan called the American System.
Yes, the American system. It was pitched as a way to unite the country economically, and it relied on three main pillars.
Okay, let's break those down.
First, protective tariffs. These are taxes on imported goods. The idea is to make foreign products more expensive so Americans would buy domestically manufactured goods instead.
Right, to protect local factories.
Exactly. Second pillar was the Second Bank of the United States to handle federal funds and issue a stable, reliable currency across the country.
And then the third pillar was what they called internal improvements, right?
That's right.
Which basically meant using federal money to build a massive network of roads and canals to connect farms to markets. And looking at this, it functions just like a closed-loop ecosystem.
It really does.
It reminds me of a well-funded startup right after a successful launch. Everyone is getting along because the money is flowing, and they share a vision. The tariffs act as a protective wall, keeping competition out. The national bank is the heart, pumping credit, and the roads are the arteries.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. Henry Clay basically wanted the raw materials of the South and West to feed the factories of the North, creating this self-sustaining loop.
Right.
But even with a single political party, that ecosystem created immediate friction. I mean, James Madison, right before leaving office, actually vetoed federal funding for roads.
Wait, he vetoed roads? Why?
He liked the idea of roads, but he argued the Constitution simply did not give the federal government the authority to build them.
Ah, I see. So nationalist goals don't settle federal power. Just because everyone likes the end result, doesn't mean they agree on who have the power to actually make it happen.
Exactly the issue. And that highly connected economic loop comes with a massive hidden risk.
Because when all your regions are financially tied together, if the startup hits a bump, everyone feels it instantly.
Right. An economic shockwave in one place travels everywhere. Which brings us to the first massive crack in the foundation, the twin shocks of 1819.
The ecosystem gets hit with a devastating blow.
A total disaster. The first is the Panic of 1819. Following the War of 1812, there was this wild speculative boom. People were borrowing heavily from poorly regulated state banks to buy Western land, hoping to cash in on really high agricultural prices.
Right, assuming the good times would just roll on.
But then, Europe finally recovers from the Napoleonic Wars. They start growing their own food again.
So demand for American crops just plummets.
Drops off a cliff. And when demand drops, prices drop. The value of American cotton tanked.
Oh man, so suddenly all these farmers and land speculators who borrowed money based on those high prices, they can't pay back their loans.
And here is where the mechanics of the banking system turn a downturn into an absolute catastrophe. The Second Bank of the United States gets spooked by the dropping land values. So to protect itself, it abruptly tightens credit. It demands that local state banks pay their debts to the national bank in hard currency, gold and silver.
But those local banks definitely don't have enough gold and silver just sitting around.
No, they don't. So they are forced to aggressively call in the loans they made to the everyday farmers and local merchants.
Which results in mass foreclosures. Ordinary people watch their farms get seized, businesses shut down, and sudden rampant unemployment just took over the cities.
The National Bank, which was supposed to be the heart stabilizing the system, effectively choked the life out of the local economies just to save itself.
It's so easy to see how a massive chunk of the population walked away from 1819 with a deep, seething hatred for distant, wealthy bankers.
Oh, absolutely. The resentment was immense.
But that economic crash is only half the story of 1819. Because while people are losing their farms, a massive political bomb goes off in Congress, the Missouri Crisis.
Right, the second shock. Missouri petitions Congress to be admitted to the Union as a state permitting slavery. This seemingly routine administrative step triggers an explosive debate.
Why was it explosive, though?
Because a New York representative, James Tallmadge Jr., proposes an amendment to gradually free children born to enslaved parents in Missouri.
Okay, hold on. Why did one amendment about one specific territory cause the entire political system to basically lose its mind?
It comes down to the raw mechanics of political power. In the House of Representatives, power is based on population, right?
Right.
Well, the North was growing much faster in population than the South, meaning the North controlled the House.
Okay, I see where this is going.
For Southern politicians, their only defense against federal interference with slavery was maintaining an equal number of slave and free states in the Senate, where every state gets exactly 2 votes.
Right, so admitting Missouri as a slave state would tip the balance of power. They're fighting over who controls the future of the entire Western expansion.
Exactly. The tension gets so high they have to broker the famous 1820 Missouri Compromise. They admit Maine as a free state and Missouri as a slave state to keep the Senate balanced.
And they also drew the 36-degree, 30-minute line across the map, right? Prohibiting slavery north of that line for future territories.
They did. But what's fascinating here is what that compromise actually accomplished versus what it actively avoided.
What do you mean?
Well, as the source points out, it preserved the immediate political math in the Senate, but it completely sidestepped the deeper constitutional crises. It didn't resolve whether Congress had permanent overriding control over slavery in the territories,
Right.
and it entirely ignored the fundamental question of whether Black Americans possessed equal citizenship rights.
So they basically just put spackle over a giant crack in the drywall. The fundamental disagreement is still there, just waiting.
Just waiting to break wide open.
And you take those two things, the intense economic resentment from the Panic of 1819 and the fractured regional trust from the Missouri debate, and you get a political environment that is just deeply toxic,
It was a pressure cooker.
which finally explodes in the presidential election of 1824.
Oh, 1824. That election shatters the one-party illusion permanently. Because there is no organized opposition party to enforce discipline, 4 different heavyweights run for president from inside the exact same political family.
Four from the same party.
Yeah, you have Andrew Jackson, the populist military hero, John Quincy Adams, the elite diplomat, William H. Crawford, representing the old party establishment, and Henry Clay, the architect of the American system.
I really want to break down the math of this election because it is wild. When the votes are counted, Andrew Jackson wins the most electoral votes. He also wins the most popular votes.
He does.
He is the clear winner, right?
I would think so.
But he doesn't become president. Walk me through how that actually happened.
Well, the Constitution requires a candidate to win a majority of the Electoral College, so more than 50%.
Right.
Jackson won a plurality, meaning he got the most votes, but because the votes were split 4 ways, he didn't hit that majority threshold. And when that happens, the 12th Amendment sends the decision to the House of Representatives to choose among the top 3 candidates.
Okay, and Henry Clay came in 4th, so he's legally eliminated from the running.
Exactly. But he's the Speaker of the House.
Right.
He wields immense influence in the chamber.
Uh-huh.
And he absolutely hates Andrew Jackson. So he throws all his political weight behind John Quincy Adams.
And Adams wins the presidency on the first ballot in the House.
He does. And then John Quincy Adams immediately turns around and appoints Henry Clay as the Secretary of State.
Wow, the ultimate backroom deal. I mean, Jackson supporters immediately label it the corrupt bargain.
Yes, the corrupt bargain.
Yeah.
Because the Secretary of State was traditionally the stepping stone to the presidency. To Jackson's base, it looked like the Washington elites literally traded the presidency for a cabinet job, completely ignoring the will of the voters.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting to me. The historical records don't offer conclusive proof of a secret, explicit quid pro quo, do they?
No, there's no smoking gun document. Adams technically followed the constitutional rules to the letter.
But doesn't this show that following the letter of the law isn't always enough to make a result feel legitimate to the voters? I mean, the optics are terrible.
They were awful. And you're completely right. Legitimacy is about perception as much as rules. And this is where the history completely changes direction.
How so?
A New York political strategist named Martin Van Buren watches this entire debacle and has a massive realization. He sees that the era of gentlemanly, unorganized politics is dead.
It's just not going to work anymore.
Right. Relying on elite consensus left them vulnerable. He realizes that to ensure the elites can never steal another election from the popular choice, you need a disciplined, ruthless political machine.
So the next time you see a massive, loud political rally with campaign songs, merchandise, and aggressive attack ads, you can draw a direct line back to Martin Van Buren in the 1820s.
You really can. He essentially invents modern mass politics to get Andrew Jackson elected in 1828.
He builds a massive coalition, organizes local committees, establishes partisan newspapers just to attack Adams, and basically turns politics into popular entertainment.
And it fundamentally shifted how Americans interacted with their government. State laws were changing simultaneously, dropping property requirements for voting, which meant a massive influx of working-class white men were suddenly eligible to vote.
And Jackson's campaign capitalized on this perfectly.
Beautifully. They didn't just stand for office, they ran for it. They hosted barbecues, parades, and framed Jackson as the ultimate champion of the common man fighting against those corrupt bankers and elites.
So Jackson rides this highly organized wave of populist anger straight into the White House. This is the dawn of Jacksonian democracy.
It is.
But the text highlights a massive defining paradox of this era, doesn't it?
It does, and it's a crucial point. The expansion of democracy was strictly bounded by race and gender. While participation widened dramatically for white men, racial restrictions on voting actually hardened.
Wait, they went backward?
Yes, several states that previously allowed free black men to vote moved to explicitly disenfranchise them. And women, of course, remained entirely excluded. So the system became more democratic for one specific demographic by actively stripping rights from others.
It's expanding the circle of power by violently pushing others out, and a tremendous amount of that power gets concentrated directly in Andrew Jackson himself. He invents something we now take completely for granted, the presidential mandate.
Right. Prior presidents viewed Congress as the primary representative of the people. Jackson flipped that dynamic entirely.
How?
He argued that because he was the only official elected by the entire nation, he alone embodied the will of the people.
So he used that claim of a popular mandate to completely bypass traditional checks and balances. He ignored his official cabinet, relying instead on an informal group of loyalist friends that the press called the kitchen cabinet.
Yes, and more importantly, he weaponized the presidential veto.
Because before Jackson, presidents generally only vetoed legislation they believed was unconstitutional, right?
Exactly. Jackson vetoed bills simply because he disliked the policy. He claimed his popular mandate gave him the authority to override Congress. It was an unprecedented consolidation of executive power.
So Jackson claims this ultimate mandate. But when a president decides he answers only to the people, the immediate question becomes, who counts as the people?
And the answer to that question was brutally clear for Native nations. The aggressive use of this executive power is most devastatingly seen in the Indian Removal Act of 1830.
Let's talk about that.
Jackson's administration sought to forcibly relocate Native nations, including the Cherokee, Muskogee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole, from their ancestral lands in the southeast to territory west of the Mississippi River.
And the core motivation here was economic, right?
Completely. It was to open up millions of acres of fertile land for white settlement and the massive expansion of slave-based cotton agriculture.
But the resistance from Native nations was incredibly sophisticated. I mean, the historical accounts of John Ross, the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, are remarkable.
They really are.
He didn't lead an armed rebellion. He fought back using the United States' own legal system.
Ross led a functioning nation with its own constitution and capital. He utilized diplomacy, national printing presses, massive petition drives, and ultimately took their fight to the United States Supreme Court.
Right, to defend Cherokee sovereignty against the state of Georgia, which was basically passing laws to swallow their land and strip them of their rights.
And his legal strategy worked.
Wait, it worked.
On paper, yes. In the 1832 case Worcester v. Georgia, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Cherokee. Chief Justice John Marshall stated that the Cherokee Nation was a distinct political community and that Georgia law had absolutely no force within their borders.
So the highest court in the land said the Cherokee were right, but there is a famous quote where Jackson supposedly responds to this ruling by saying, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it."
I'm glad you brought that up because our source explicitly debunks that. We need to correct the record. There is zero reliable historical evidence Jackson ever actually said those words.
Right. He didn't need to say a cartoonish villain line to do the damage. The tragic reality is that the executive branch simply ignored the Supreme Court.
They did. Jackson allowed Georgia to continue its harassment of the Cherokee, refusing to enforce the federal treaty obligations.
Which is just staggering.
Ultimately, a small, unauthorized minority faction of the Cherokee signed the Treaty of Nuakota, agreeing to relocate.
Even though the vast majority rejected it.
Right. Chief Ross and the majority rejected it as completely fraudulent, but the federal government used it anyway as the legal pretext for forced removal.
And this culminates in the Trail of Tears.
Yes. Under Jackson's successor, Martin Van Buren, roughly 16,000 Cherokee were forced into camps and marched west under military guard, resulting in an estimated 4,000 deaths.
It was a catastrophic human tragedy, all to clear 25 million acres for the cotton economy. And, this brings us to a glaring contradiction in Jackson's presidency.
Oh, the hypocrisy is massive.
Because while he is allowing the state of Georgia to completely ignore federal treaties and the Supreme Court in the name of state sovereignty, another state decides they want to ignore federal law too, and he reacts totally differently.
South Carolina. They were furious over the Tariff of 1828, which they called the Tariff of Abominations.
Let's quickly explain the mechanics of why they hated this tariff so much. A tariff taxes imported goods. That helps northern factories because Americans buy their stuff instead of British stuff.
Right.
But the South's entire economy was based on exporting cotton to Europe. So when the U.S. slaps a tariff on British goods, the British retaliate by buying less Southern cotton.
Exactly. The South felt they were being financially drained to subsidize northern industry. And leading the pushback is Jackson's own former vice president, John C. Calhoun.
Talk about drama.
Right. Calhoun develops a radical constitutional framework called nullification. He argues that because the states originally formed the federal government, a single state has the sovereign right to declare federal law unconstitutional and simply refuse to enforce it within its borders.
And in 1832, South Carolina puts the theory into practice. They hold a convention, legally nullify the federal tariffs, and threaten to secede from the Union entirely if the federal government tries to collect the taxes by force.
Now, South Carolina expected Jackson to side with them, given his support for state authority in Georgia.
Naturally.
Instead, Jackson's response is furious. He completely rejects nullification. He issues a proclamation declaring that the Union is indivisible and that nullification is treason.
He even gets Congress to pass a force bill authorizing him to use the military against South Carolina.
He does.
Wait, I have to ask. Jackson just allowed Georgia to completely ignore federal treaties with the Cherokee in the name of state authority. But when South Carolina tries to ignore a federal tariff, Jackson threatens them with military force. Isn't he just using whatever constitutional argument fits his immediate goal?
That is an excellent point, and the module validates that completely. It reveals the deeply situational nature of his constitutional principles.
It's entirely outcome-based.
Exactly. In the case of Cherokee sovereignty, state authority aided his overarching goal of removal and expansion, so he empowered it. But with nullification, state authority threatened to fracture the Union and challenge his own executive authority, so he moved to crush it. He adapted his interpretation of the Constitution based entirely on the outcome he desired.
Henry Clay steps in yet again and brokers a compromise, gradually lowering the tariff so South Carolina can back down and save face.
Once again, Clay tries to hold the system together.
But the constitutional fault line about whether a state can secede is left completely unresolved.
It is. And Jackson felt his triumph over nullification proved his mandate from the people. And he decided to use that mandate to destroy the one institution he felt still rivaled his power, the second bank of the United States.
The bank war. Jackson viewed the national bank as an unconstitutional monopoly, right? Run by wealthy, unelected insiders who manipulated the economy for their own gain.
That was his view, yes. The president of the bank, Nicholas Biddle, was a wealthy aristocrat who had actually done a decent job stabilizing the currency, but he deeply underestimated Jackson.
Which seems to be a common mistake.
Very common. In 1832, Biddle and Henry Clay make a massive political miscalculation. They decide to force an early vote in Congress to renew the bank's charter. They figure that since it's an election year, Jackson won't dare veto it because causing economic uncertainty would cost him votes.
They basically played a game of chicken with Andrew Jackson, which is historically a terrible idea.
A terrible idea.
Yeah.
Jackson doesn't just veto the charter, he uses his veto message to brilliantly frame the bank as a monster of the privileged elite that preys on ordinary citizens.
And it's a wildly popular message. Jackson wins re-election in a landslide.
And viewing his re-election as a definitive mandate to kill the bank, Jackson orders all federal deposits to be pulled out of the national bank and redistributed into selected state banks, which his critics called pet banks.
So in retaliation, Nicholas Biddle deliberately restricts credit nationwide. He tries to cause economic pain to prove how necessary his bank is.
Which is astonishing. And it only proved Jackson's core argument. No single private citizen should hold the unelected power to deliberately crash the American economy just to win a political dispute.
Biddle just proved Jackson right.
Exactly. Biddle's contraction hurts ordinary borrowers and destroys whatever political support the bank had left.
But destroying the bank came with massive consequences. We have to look at the mechanics of the specie circular, this executive order Jackson issued in 1836.
Right. So Jackson inherently distrusted paper money. He only believed in hard currency gold and silver, known as specie. Because people were using poorly backed paper money from local banks to buy up federal land in the West, Jackson issued the specie circular, requiring all future federal land purchases to be made exclusively with gold or silver.
The ripple effects of this were devastating. People started pulling all their gold and silver out of Eastern banks to go buy land out west.
Yep.
Suddenly, the Eastern banks had zero hard currency in their vaults to back up the paper money they had lent out. Credit completely froze.
It did. The source's careful verdict is that when you combine the destruction of the National Regulatory Bank, the draining of hard currency through the specie circular, and a simultaneous international crisis where British credit tightened and global cotton prices fell, you get the Panic of 1837.
The economy completely collapses again, and ordinary working-class Americans face years of brutal unemployment and financial ruin.
It was devastating. And looking back from 1840, the landscape of American politics is just unrecognizable from the good feelings of 1815. The one-party system is completely dead.
In its place, we have a permanent, highly organized two-party system fighting for control. On one side, the Democrats defending Jackson's legacy of a powerful popular presidency, hostile to federal banks, and driven by mass voter mobilization.
Right. And on the other side, the Whig Party forms specifically in opposition to what they view as Jackson's unchecked executive tyranny. They revive Henry Clay's vision of a federally supported, interconnected economy.
The Whigs even steal Martin Van Buren's playbook for the 1840 election. They run a military hero, William Henry Harrison. Even though he's from a wealthy Virginia family, they market him with catchy slogans and log cabin imagery, branding him as a simple, hard, cider-drinking common man.
They beat the Democrats at their own mass media game.
They really did. But studying this era leaves us with a critical realization about how these two massive political machines operated. Both the Whigs and the Democrats purposely built cross-regional coalitions. They worked incredibly hard to ally Northern voters with Southern voters.
They did.
And they did that specifically to postpone any direct national political confrontation over slavery. They built an incredibly loud, noisy, deeply entrenched political system designed to argue about tariffs and banks so they wouldn't have to talk about the deepest crack in the foundation.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder directly from the text's conclusion on that 1840 election. The era of good feelings proved that you cannot force national unity just by ignoring deep structural fractures.
Right.
So as we look at the modern two-party system that took shape by 1840, it forces us to ask, how long can a political machine survive when its primary driving strategy is actively avoiding its most fundamental moral and constitutional contradiction?
Wow. I mean, the house on the fault line might have a fresh coat of paint. It might even have two distinct political parties living inside it, fighting over the furniture, but the ground underneath is still shifting. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources today. If you're looking to understand the roots of modern political smear campaigns, the terrifying reality of unchecked executive power, or the hidden mechanics of economic cycles, examining this complex era is the ultimate shortcut to being a truly well informed citizen today. Catch you next time.